Hello and welcome back to Perspectives, bringing you the news and views we hope are relevant to you. In today's show, scuffles break out at Hindu temples across Canada over the weekend. Also in Canada, the largest illegal drug lab in history is discovered. It turns out it has links to India. And across the world, 40 years to the days after the Sikh Genocide of 1984, the community gathers with other supporters to remember those terrible events at events in all diaspora countries. We also take a look at a classic recent example of India's misinformation campaign. And finally, that nemesis of Hindutva extremist Islamic Pakistan shames India in demonstrating how to treat Sikh pilgrims properly, respecting their right to exercise their religion in freedom. Well, joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our amazing viewers out there. And the viewer out in Edmonton, Alberta, we saw you posted where you're from. Don't forget to share your location. We'd love to know where you're watching us.
We certainly do. And together, James and I will be bringing you our perspectives of the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And as always, of course, we'll be taking a look at lots of your great comments at the end of the show. So please do keep those coming. Right, James, let's get on with the show. What are you going to start us off with this morning?
The picket lines were up. The Khalistan supporters were outside of several Hindu temples throughout Vancouver and Brampton, Ontario. Angus, they turned into a bit of a scuffle and some violence broke out. Now, of course, the India media is blaming the Khalistan separatists, calling them all kinds of names, but we wouldn't expect anything less from them. But what I have seen of these videos, Angus, is just a lot of scuffles, a lot of swinging, as you can see in this image on the screen here. Some things were swung, including Khalistan flags, some sticks and such, but more so, the tempers were just flaring. And I understand that on both sides of this divide, there is a lot of emotion. Today or yesterday on Sunday, there was different events going on for Diwali and other Hindu worshipping at these temples. And to bring any type of violence to the property of a temple, I'm not going one side, whether it's a Hindu temple, whether it's a Sikh temple. It is important that we all have the freedom without violence, without threat, and without concern to go and practice whatever religion we want. But again, there is such a volatile atmosphere right now. Of course, as you said in the intro, Angus, that we're approaching the 40-year anniversary of the Sikh Genocide, and emotions are running high. So for me, I'm just pleading with everyone on all sides to please take a step back, take a breath, and remember, this is what Modi and his government want. They want everybody fighting, whether it's in Canada, whether it's in the US, whether it's anywhere else. Because when that happens, the whole breakdown of what's been achieved, and amazingly achieved, I might add, by all of those fighting for a Sikh homeland known as Khalistan, it gets diluted. All of the gains that have been made to gather support from the non-Sikh community is really tarnished when these acts come out in the media. And of course, as I said, the Indian media is really pushing the narrative that it was Sikh activists that were really at fault. But the video I'm going to show is actually quite different. You'll notice that a lot of the Khalistan flags are outside of the temple property. There are maybe a few people that are on the property, but more, it seems like the Hindus were actually in dispute and having a clash with the Peel Regional Police Department. There were police who in my opinion, were very over-aggressive. And you can see in the video that I'm going to show that there is an officer who actually punches one of the people in the property in the head. He really has no concern. And whether he is Hindu or Sikh, of course, I don't know. But at the same time, the people in the crowd that are filming this video are screaming that he is a Khalistan plant in the Peel Regional Police Department and so forth. So I do believe that there was some blame to go around on all sides of it. Some of the Sikh protesters probably did allow their emotions to spill over. But mostly, I think that there was the biggest clash, in my opinion, from the videos I've seen, as I said, are between the Hindu people and the police department there that was there to keep the peace and to keep the violence down, and actually, in my opinion, started to bring it up. And I'm going to play this video for you so you can kind of get a scene as to what was going on. So as you can see there, Angus, there was a bit of chaos happening throughout the event. And at one point, the lady was screaming that it's been going on for 2 hours. About 3 minutes later, she's screaming that it's been going on for 3 hours or 2 hours, like back and forth on her timeline. But at the end of the day, it seemed to me that just chaos, tensions, and tempers had flared up and just spilled over. And I know that the intention for any Khalistan protest or rallies are to bring peace and to find a democratic solution to creating a homeland. But again, this is what the Modi government would love to see, is all of this happening in the news to bring really to bring a dark light to both sides, because of the fact that no matter what side is in the media, it's really furthering his agenda to push Canada as a place of chaos, as a place of hatred, as a place of instability, and a place where people are not safe. So again, it just feeds into Modi's narrative, and I encourage everyone on both sides to please use calmer heads. Let's look at where we're at in terms of the world is supporting and paying attention to the Khalistan referendum, to the Khalistan movement. And this has taken decades for all of those people who have been working so hard to achieve. So let's not move forward as we hit as they say in baseball, the homeward stretch. In the protests, in the rallies, in the awareness, in the education, and in the referendum. Let's keep focus on the end goal. Let's keep calm and show that the Khalistan referendum is a peaceful movement, and that the Sikh people, we all know that it's part of Sikhi to be non-violent, to support those in need, to be accepting of all religions, to empower people who are down on their luck and in dire straits. So again, I just call on everyone to keep a calmness and keep focused. I know emotions are high. I know that it's a tough year ahead, but let's move forward in a positive light, Angus.
Yes, I think the lesson here is very clear. The Indian media are looking always for information, for material that they can manipulate, twist to support their own narrative. And of course, their narrative is that the Khalistan movement is a militant movement. It is violent. It is full of extremists and terrorists. So it is absolutely imperative that at every public gathering of Khalistan supporters that the mood remains peaceful, it remains buoyant, it remains positive, all the good emotions. It's so critical that every Khalistan rally, every time that the Khalistan flag is seen in public, is that it is associated with calmness, peacefulness and positivity, because any issue of violence, any issue of even just basic scuffles, it's very easy that we live in a world where everybody carries a camera now and they can upload anything to social media in an instant. And the Indian Hindutva IT cells are all over things like this. The moment they can get any material that shows anybody with a Khalistan flag doing anything other than peaceful protest, it is absolute gold dust for Hindutva. And of course, they will manipulate, and certainly one of the stories I'll talk about shortly, they are absolute masters at misinformation. They're very practiced. They've been doing this for a very long time. So, gosh, it is so critical that the Khalistan movement, every time it gets together, must always be deeply disciplined. They must absolutely control themselves and remain utterly, utterly peaceful. They will be provoked. I will guarantee that there will be agent provocateur every time there is a Khalistan rally of any description, whether it's a referendum or whether it's a genocide event. There will always be Hindutva provocateurs there deliberately trying to stir up trouble, because that creates this very material that the Hindutva IT cells can then use to spread this whole fake narrative that the Khalistan movement is made up of militants and extremists. That's what must be avoided. And the one wonderful thing that has happened over recent years is the Khalistan movement has gained so much momentum. It's getting mainstream coverage now. And every time it's on the mainstream news, generally speaking, it's shown as peaceful, as credible, as intelligent, as very articulate. Many spokespeople have been interviewed by mainstream media and have always been very intelligent and articulate. And of course, backed up by peaceful supporters waving Khalistan flags. That's the image we need to keep pushing forward. That's what must happen at every event. I know it's very tempting when provoked by the Hindutva forces to fight back, but discipline is key here. And the real lesson to the Khalistan movement is you must remain disciplined. Don't lose this amazing momentum, this amazing ground that has been gained now. It is entering the mainstream. The mainstream superpower politicians are talking about it. Let's not lose that wonderful positive ground that's been won. And one specific thing here, James, I'd like to raise. In that specific video, there was that Indian lady shouting very loudly, "He's hitting with a stick." And her surrounded by Indian flags, pointing at this Canadian RCMP officer carrying a baton. And she was calling him out very loudly and aggressively, saying he's hitting with a stick. Well, all I would say to that lady is look at the Indian police. Is that they are renowned. How do they do crowd control? They do it with sticks. Yet you are living in Canada, the land of the free. The police only use their sticks when absolutely necessary and provoked. So I would suggest you turn your ire on your own country or go back to India if you don't like the way the RCMP police the protest. So, but yes, I think you also hit the nail on the head there, James. It's a divide and conquer strategy by Hindutva, by the RSS. They are turning Hindus against Sikhs and Muslims and vice versa. This is divisive politics. This is exactly what they want. They want to see these protests. We see them regularly across Canada and across other areas of the diaspora. We see Hindus standing up with Indian flags facing off Khalistanis and Sikhs on the other side, all getting very angry with each other. That is what the RSS want. This is how they keep control. They learned from the British. It's a divide and rule, a divide and conquer tactic. This is how the British controlled India and their empire. They divided any threat against them. That is what the RSS and the BJP are doing. They are deliberately turning the Hindus against the Sikhs and the Muslims and vice versa. That is how they keep control, James. So yeah, I think in a nutshell, your story, I think really just sums up. That is a little microcosm of India, basically.
Yeah. Absolutely, Angus. And for those that are going out to the protests, I'll just address this quickly here in the fact that we know that emotions can run high. We know that there is a history. We know that there is suffering that has happened in the past and oppression that's happening in our current day. Now, as someone, I have in the past seen a friend murdered in front of me. I have also seen a family member who was a victim of a home invasion where the individual actually chewed a part of my uncle's face off. That's how extreme it was. I have covered the front lines in war zones and seen the atrocities that Russia has inflicted on Ukrainian people, the smells, the tastes, the atmosphere, the screaming, the pain. So I know that emotions can run high. Believe me, I've been there. So again, I just plead with you to keep it peaceful because of all of the positives that have made inroads for the Khalistan movement. I would hate to see it lost and really buried in a message by India to be able to utilize that footage and really, make something that isn't true, the narrative. So, but let's move on to the next story, Angus, and we're going to take a look, actually, just for clarification too, in the last story, it was the Peel Regional Police, not the Royal Canadian Mounted Police that were involved in that incident, so just for clarification. But speaking of the RCMP, Angus, let's take a look at the RCMP working hard to not only deal with the drug issues that we have looked at from a world standpoint, but also here in Western Canada with a local connection in Surrey, British Columbia. The RCMP have busted the biggest huge drug lab in Canadian history. Not only did they bring out over $500,000 in Canadian currency, they also brought out enough fentanyl to actually kill every Canadian twice over. It, as I said, was the largest super lab arrest and seizure in Canadian history. It had everything from fentanyl to methamphetamines to GHB to date rape drugs, marijuana, you name it, it was there. Over half a ton of narcotics and illegal devices, as including explosive devices, handguns, AR-15s. I mean, it was like something out of a Pablo Escobar movie or something out of Breaking Bad, the TV series. It is unbelievable, and we'll take a look at some of the images as we look at the story. Now, this is actually in Falkland, British Columbia. That is just a very small community, and the only thing that it's usually recognized for is being the home of the world's largest extension cord, believe it or not, that lights up a sign that says Falkland and the Canadian flag. So, I mean, this is what they are known for. And now they're going to be known as home to the biggest super drug lab in the country's history. And what makes this even worse is that not only is all of the illicit drugs making their way to the Canadian streets, is that they're being shipped abroad. They wouldn't say exactly, but the RCMP, after the arrest and after moving in on this property, did move forward with the Canadian Border Security Services Agency, and they intercepted a large quantity of drugs that was actually en route to be shipped out of the country. So it is feeding a drug epidemic and pandemic globally. It was not something that was just feeding Canadian addicts, but it was feeding out around the world. They estimate that the total street value of what was confiscated and found at the location was over $500 million. That's billion with a B, dollars worth of narcotics. And it is tied to several individuals who are actually Indian nationals. So right now, the investigation is ongoing. There is obviously a lot of gang activity and gang involvement, whether it is the India gangs working with the cartels of Mexico, or exactly how it pieces together with the gang element. That is yet to be seen and yet to be announced by the RCMP, but they have confirmed that there is definitely a lot of involvement of the gangs. And the reason why I brought up Mexican gangs working with the Indian gangs is that there were certain precursors to the manufacturing of drugs and narcotics that actually have never been seen in Western Canada yet. They are more a trademark and use by the Mexican cartels. So that shows that there may be some partnership between the cartels and the India gangs and other gangs throughout British Columbia and throughout Canada. On the screen here, you can see that there was 54 kilograms of fentanyl, massive amounts of precursor chemicals, 390 kilograms of methamphetamine, 35 kilograms of cocaine, 15 kilograms of MDMA, and 6 kilograms of cannabis. And cannabis here is legalized, but for that size of amount, that's a different story. But at the same time, it's not a big deal for the cannabis part in terms of law enforcement. In addition, as I said, 89 firearms, which included 45 handguns, 21 AR-15 style rifles, submachine guns. Some were loaded and ready for use. To date, 9 of the guns have been identified as stolen. And again, this is a release directly from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. So this is not coming from a news agency with any bias. This is directly from the RCMP, including these images of this drug super lab that was busted. So it is a huge, huge step to break down and to get these drugs off the streets in Canada and around the world. And of course, it will be further investigated moving forward, whether or not there was maybe the Bishnoi group or others that were involved in this. So far, Gaganpreet Randhawa has been identified as the main suspect by the federal policing group of investigators. He's in custody and charged with numerous drugs and firearms related offenses. But again, this is another area that we touched on the other day about different countries being able to utilize the addiction and overdose crisis to target whether it's communities such as the Punjab or Canadian streets and worldwide targets to push these illicit drugs and cheap drugs into circulation to target everybody. Nobody specifically, just mass parts of the population, Angus.
Oh yeah, drugs. It's just a scourge of the modern world, really, isn't it? And clearly, everybody knows the drug industry is global. It is an international industry, and of course, we all do know about the South American drug cartels, the Colombia drug cartels. But of course, we now discover that there are these massive production units springing up all across the North America. Here in the UK, we've had various ones discovered as well. And here we are, rural Canada, and this massive manufacturing capability. It's terrifying. I think what's particularly relevant to us in our show, of course, is this link to India. And I think this does show the bridges, the international bridges between these countries, where clearly these gangs involved in this illicit trade are working together. They're working together to manufacture it, to ship it globally. It is a very well-oiled industrial machine, clearly. I mean, you only need to walk down the streets of any city on the planet to be able to find drugs of almost every kind. And of course, those drugs have a huge supply chain. Wherever they're grown, they have to be distributed. And there is this huge logistics supply chain that would rival any mainstream blue chip company. And of course, they have to do it under the cover of the whole thing's done illegally. So it has to be hidden away from the eyes of the law. It has to be away from the eyes of any normal distribution freight capability. So, I mean, one has to take your hat off in a reluctant manner to say, actually, these guys are incredible how they manage to run these dreadful operations and still avoid the eyes of the law, and yet get huge quantities of their product out into the street globally. But yeah, and I think it is the one particular thing I find quite concerning here is the fentanyl link here. This isn't, we're not just talking cocaine, which of course is the big thing of South America, or heroin, which is the big thing of Pakistan and Afghanistan. They're the big producers of heroin. This is fentanyl, which actually ironically, is one of the evils of the Western big pharma, the pharmaceutical companies. They're the ones who've actually engendered this terrible epidemic of opiates, of addiction to opiates, which of course is now being fed by the illegal world. The drug cartels have now realised that most of America, certainly most of North America, seem to be hooked on these drugs like fentanyl. And of course, when people, ordinary middle-class people, respectable, so-called respectable people, can't get their hands on these drugs legally because they've been hooked on them by big pharma, they're now looking to the underworld to feed them with these drugs. And of course, the underworld are more than happy to step in and feed drugs like fentanyl and these other opiates. So it is, unfortunately, it is a very, very sad indictment of the modern world that there is the legal industrial machine fed by big pharma getting the Western world hooked on these drugs. And of course, there is the illegal drug cartels who are now making hay out of this, so to speak, who are now making billions of dollars through this. And these, of course, James, are the only ones that have been discovered. Of course, this industry is enormous. I mean, the numbers are eye-watering, the amount of drugs that are consumed right across the world, the Western world, and of course in the Punjab we talk about regularly. And that has to be produced somewhere. So I think, what's been discovered in Canada, as massive as it is just a drop in the ocean in what is actually still out there yet to be discovered. So, but unfortunately, James, it is a modern evil in modern society. And, all we can do is support law enforcement in their continued battle to try and keep a lid on this dreadful trade.
Absolutely, and definitely hats off to the RCMP and the many investigators and other departments that were involved in this mass investigation. They moved quick on it to make sure that these drugs were stopped from getting out on the streets. And if anybody is really unclear as to the total impacts of the fentanyl crisis, of the narcotic industry and the impacts that it has on the Canadian economy, American economy, UK economy, the impacts of the Sackler family and Purdue Pharma. I have done many episodes, very in-depth reporting on this issue that you can watch for free on truecrimeandjusticetv.com as well, Angus. So it really breaks down a lot of how it's just breaking our countries and communities.
Yeah, and it's no coincidence that India are pouring drugs into the Punjab because they are fully aware of how dreadfully undermining for any society drugs can be. It literally dissolves a society from within. It's terrible, terrible stuff. So thank you for that, James. And let's move on to other very serious matters again. It is, well, first of all, today, actually, 4th of November, is 7 years to the day when Jagtar Singh Johal was arbitrarily detained by undercover police in India after attending his wedding in the Punjab. And 7 years ago today, he was bundled into the back of a van and remains in prison, still awaiting conviction of any crime. The British government remains completely, shamefully inactive in terms of doing anything. Lots of meetings, lots of big words, but nothing really concrete has been done. So yet again, we highlight the fact that it is 7 years to the day that a British citizen, Jagtar Singh Johal, remains languishing in an Indian jail, still without any conviction. He's appeared in court over 135 times and still no conviction for any crime. It is an absolute travesty of justice. It is a stain on India, and it is a stain on the United Kingdom for not doing anything about it. That's one thing. Now, the other thing, of course, is that over the last few days has been the 40th anniversary of the Sikh Genocide back in November 1984. A few days ago, Friday, 31st of October, was the 40th anniversary when Sikhs across the world celebrated, actually, the assassination of India's tyrannical Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. And she was assassinated by two martyrs, Sikh martyrs, Beant Singh and Satwant Singh, who assassinated her in the garden of her garden on the 31st of October. And of course, what followed that was the start of the Sikh genocide over the following few days. And of course, pictures of the Shaheeds, and this includes actually Kehar Singh, who was also one of the Shaheeds involved in this. Pictures of the Shaheeds, the martyrs, are on display in countless Sikh spaces across the world, including many of the most historic and frequented gurdwaras, honouring their act and statuses in Sikh history. And of course, along with the attacks on the Punjab and the Sikhs, during her reign as Prime Minister of India, Indira Gandhi declared India a state of emergency at one stage to justify arresting political rivals and journalists. Also, she was responsible for the forced sterilisation of millions of Indians, reasoning as to why countless people, not just in the Sikh community, view Indira Gandhi, as an absolute tyrant. And this is before we even talk about Operation Shanti. And as I've said before over the recent days, is that most people believe that the assassination of Indira Gandhi was in response to Operation Blue Star, that dreadful, unjustified attack on the most holiest of Sikh sites, the Golden Temple. Operation Blue Star, which involved over 1,000 Indian troops, basically a full frontal military assault on the Golden Temple, on basically what was a church. It was a Sikh place of worship that was occupied by tens of thousands of innocent men, women and children who were killed, massacred in that assault. That was Operation Blue Star. In fact, it was Operation Shanti that it turns out, as evidence has proven since. Operation Shanti was the reason that Indira Gandhi was assassinated. It is believed that Beant and Satwant Singh assassinated Gandhi to prevent Operation Shanti, which was designed, this operation was designed and planned to happen actually 40 years almost to the day now, where she was planning to firebomb and raze to the ground hundreds, if not thousands, of Sikh villages across the border with Pakistan, to basically massacre in cold blood as many Sikh families as she could, all in the name of this false flag claiming that Pakistan were looking to invade the Punjab, and that the Punjabi Sikhs were going to rise up against India in support of Pakistan. So that was the justification, her fake justification, to massacre hundreds of thousands of Sikhs back in 1984, in November 1984. This plot was discovered, and Satwant and Beant Singh then assassinated her in a desperate attempt to stop this genocide from occurring. Now, as a result of the assassination of Indira Gandhi, of course, we know that the following days saw the dreadful murder and massacre of tens of thousands of innocent Sikh men, women and children who were dragged out of their homes. They were set fire to, tyres were put around their bodies, set fire to. They were murdered in cold blood. They were shot. The women were gang raped. They were dragged away into buildings and gang raped by Hindu mobs. All this egged on and pushed on by Congress party officials who handed out address lists of where all the Sikh families lived across Delhi and other cities across northwest India. And these Hindu mobs were armed. They were given sticks and weapons of all sorts, all descriptions, iron rods, and they were told, here is where you will find Sikh families. Go out there and kill them in their mass numbers. It was a dreadful, dreadful stain on Indian history. And amidst this global effort, and of course, 40 years later, the Sikh community has never, of course, forgotten these events, and every anniversary of the genocide, the Sikh community get together to remind the world of this dreadful stain on Indian history. And this year particularly, there have been events marked around the world, across the diaspora, particularly here in the UK, but of course across North America, Australia, New Zealand and Europe to some extent. There have been gatherings, all sorts of events to mark this dreadful anniversary. There's been a huge community push to bring it into the mainstream. The mainstream news are now covering this, which is fantastic. And also, as part of this, respected author Pav Singh has launched a new website called 1984 Sikh Archive. And this archive is, amongst many, this is one of many initiatives that have happened since 1984 to try and mark and document the events of the genocide and help to bring to account those who are guilty of this. And the 1984 Sikh Archive is a collection, and I'll show here just a brief look at the website, because as I say, it deserves support, as all these websites do. It is very important that all these sites continue to document what happened so it is never forgotten. And on this particular archive, Pab Singh has detailed on a day-by-day basis lots of stories, anecdotes, written documentation, lots of photographs. And of course, it goes on a day-by-day basis. The 31st of October, we see the actual anniversary of Indira Gandhi's death. There is a timeline that goes through the actual events of that particular day. And then just after 9 a.m, when she was about to be interviewed, actually by a British actor, Peter Ustinov, she was walking across her garden when her 2 Sikh bodyguards assassinated her. And I think they recorded 32 bullets actually entered her body. She died later when she was whisked off to the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. And the site documents the hour-by-hour events. Now, these events hour by hour are important because it was those events that built up the momentum where the Congress Party and the particular individuals in the Congress Party then went on to mainstream radio and started broadcasting chants to whip up the mob, to turn on the Sikh community, to then turn on everybody from the Sikh community right across India, and it was almost like a pre-planned event. It happened so quickly. It took a few hours for the mobs to start gathering, but what then did happen, this was the important distinction, apart from these weren't just random riots, is that the Congress Party then actually sent out their own representatives. Senior party members were then sent out, as I said, to try and organise. This wasn't disorganised. The whole thing then started being organised. Buses and coaches were brought to send whole groups of armed militant mobs to various parts of the city, across to the suburbs, across to the various gurdwaras and the communities, so they could pour out and then start attacking the mobs. So then, of course, day by day, 1st of November through to the 4th of November, these mobs then went about their rampage. And again, this site documents with lots of photos some of the dreadful, dreadful things that occurred over those following days, which then culminated in the final days between the 4th and 19th excuse me, of November, when the events started being broadcast actually to the world. The world started actually witnessing what was going on, and under international pressure, and of course the Indian government realising this thing had actually just run a little bit more out of control than they realised, that this was actually a genocide that they were responsible for, they then started reluctantly to intervene. But of course this is after 4 days where the Indian police not just stood by and watched these events happen, they actually were seen in many cases encouraging the Hindu mobs to get in there and start killing and torturing and murdering these families. And don't forget, these are children that were murdered in the streets. Again, it is beyond shameful what actually happened. So have a visit to this site, give it your support. That's the 1984 Sikh archive. Have a look at that. Have a look at the great documentation archive that's been put together. Now, of course, the events have been covered across the world. The mainstream media, I'm very pleased to report that the mainstream media across the world have covered the events. Well done to the Sikh community for getting out there and highlighting this. This is what activism does. This is the benefits of good, strong activism. It does ensure it gets pushed into the mainstream. Here in the UK, the British Broadcasting Company, the BBC, did also recognise the events. But, and here is a big but, and this is actually sadly what typifies certainly the BBC. Sikhs from across the world have actually condemned the BBC for their coverage of the genocide anniversary, because they're pushing the Indian state propaganda that the Sikh genocide was what they called, in their words, riots. Yes, the BBC headlined it as remembering Delhi's anti-Sikh riots. I mean, words fail me to describe this. This is a genocide that was actually recognised and acknowledged even by the Indian government itself as a genocide. The High Court in Delhi recognised the events as a genocide. Yet here we have the British Broadcasting Company, this mouthpiece of the British establishment, refers to it as Delhi's anti-Sikh riots. I mean, talking about a euphemism. This wasn't a riot, it was a genocide. Again, words fail me. So, of course, unsurprisingly, as a result of that, social media has been ablaze from the Sikh community. Dr. Anmol Kapoor said, "Never forget, never let it happen again, never let anyone take away life of others. Human lives are precious and each one is worth saving. It was not a riot, it was #genocide, tagging in the BBC. Mankamal Singh, same old BS. In an article which offers as little empathy as possible, the BBC shouldn't even have bothered. They played their part to misinform 40 years ago and have continued ever since." Yeah, this is somebody referencing that even 40 years ago, the BBC, as part of the British establishment, didn't cover the genocide properly. Again, it was their own interpretation that seemed to ally with the Indian establishment. Once again, it brings up this collaboration between the British establishment and the Indian establishment. Shamandeep Singh, November 1984 was an organised, planned and systemic genocide of tens of thousands of Sikhs. It was a barbaric act of violence that went on for days in broad daylight. It was not a riot. Update your archives. Use appropriate language, BBC. KSP likewise said it was genocide. The Indian army even built a replica of the Darbar Sahib to practice their invasion. Yes, Operation Blue Star was planned in advance. It was planned years in advance. Sikh genocide, he says, referring again to the BBC News. Dr. Rubiar, genocide is a more appropriate word. Again, this huge outpouring from the Sikh community and many respected people in the Sikh community, academics, activists, campaigners, you name it, they're all pouring out saying, condemning the BBC. Again, the pacifist Rebel 84, another outlet, says it was a genocide. And even references where the Delhi court, the Delhi High Court said it was officially and acknowledged it officially as a genocide. 40 years later, there's clear evidence of Indian state-sponsored pogroms with genocidal intent against Sikhs, yet BBC World continues to downplay these horrific crimes. Shame! And of course, the 1984 Sikh Archive itself, which we've just been looking at, they also likewise say the BBC World rubs salt into the wound of the victims of the genocide, of the pogroms, genocidal massacres, by using the term riots. The perpetrators used to shield themselves from complicity in the violence. It didn't just happen, it was made to happen. Again, this reference to the fact that it was all by design. So, yeah, unfortunately, it does seem that the BBC, to its shame, is parroting the British establishment, which is, of course, working in alignment with the Indian establishment. I'm delighted to say that mainstream news in North America and certainly down under in Australia and New Zealand, they have covered it with a lot more respect. They have referred to genocides as it rightly should have been. So, yeah, lots of gatherings, lots of events. Well done to the Sikh community. Well done certainly for turning out for these events, but more importantly, well done for making sure it hits the mainstream media. That's what is important, that these events are not forgotten. And of course, they do support this whole movement towards Khalistan. It's very important that people understand, that people not associated with the community, that just general Westerners understand why the Khalistan movement exists. And once they understand things like the genocide that occurred, they will understand and therefore support the Khalistan movement. The Khalistan movement can only exist with global support. That support is winning. People are now getting behind the Khalistan movement because they are understanding things like the Sikh genocide. So it is all connected. Also, congratulations to the Jakara movement. This massive California walk that is it completed? I think it's just about to complete it. They organised this 350-mile walk between Gurdwaras to mark the 40th anniversary. And of course, this event, this massive walk that had a huge following, well done to everybody who took part in that. It did capture media attention, of course, as I said, to gain further understanding of what happened in 1984. Jasjit Singh tweeted, "I extended an invitation to countless local elected members to attend the genocide march. As a result of this, Mayor Steinberg replied, 'Yes,' almost immediately. Well done to the mayor. Thank you for speaking in support of the Transnational Repression Reporting Act and for recognising 1984 as a genocide." And of course, Assembly Member Jasmeet Bains, this Sikh politician who's been so vocal, so active and so successful in highlighting all the issues of the Sikh community in the States. Thank you to everyone, she says, who joined us in solidarity today to finish the Fearless for Justice March and recognise the anniversary. Injustice cannot stand against the light of day. Today, we were that light of day. So, James, I think well done to everybody in the Sikh community who recognised the events of 1984. They've ensured that the mainstream media have been well and truly brought to the attention of this event. And yet, mainstream media has shown all these events. It's been in many main news items in the evening news, the most watched news. Is fantastic. The high profile coverage that these events have been getting. And of course, as I said, James, it's so important for the Khalistan movement because this is one of the foundations that supports the whole concept of Khalistan, and it is happening.
Absolutely, Angus. And, it's very timely that a lot of governments are starting different petitions and movements in order to have it officially recognized by the US government, by Canadian government, and others around the world as a genocide, that to really adjust the history books to put it as it was. It was not riots, it was a genocide. And I'm glad to see governments finally starting to give that official recognition.
Indeed, it's again to the BBC's shame. So, okay, let's move on to my second story. This is quite a good one. This is the Sikh Coalition have themselves. We often talk about misinformation and how the Indian media and the IT cells and Hindutva forces will use anything they can get their hands on, any material they can get their hands on, and twist it and manipulate it to turn it into an anti-Sikh narrative and a pro-Indian narrative. Well, the Sikh Coalition has posted up a classic example of this. And the Sikh Coalition, by themselves, have been a very successful organisation in highlighting all the issues of the Sikh community. They are non-partisan, other than, of course, they represent the Sikh community, but they have done it in a way that has been very intelligent. They've been very fair. They are known to attack these issues with a completely, as much as possible, non-partisan manner, but in certainly as much of an objective perspective as they can. So they actually have a very credible and a very respectable reputation. They have been invited by the US government on many occasions to advise the US government on policy making, etc. As a result of that, they have a very, very high profile and very well respected reputation. So they themselves have given an example of how the Indian government and Hindutva are twisting the narrative to attack the Sikh community, whether it's in North America or anywhere. And they've given this example, and we reported on this recently. When Narendra Modi came to the US, a very high-profile visit to the United States, he met President Biden, he met various people, and just before Modi met with Biden, there was a very well-attended meeting of the Sikh community in the US with high-level members of the US government just a few days before Modi's visit to the US. And the right wing in India hated this. They couldn't believe that the Sikh community would be given an audience by the US government. So, as a result of that, the Sikh Coalition have brought together a prime example of how the Indian media and the Indian mainstream particularly have twisted those events to suit their narrative. And what they said, excuse me, the Sikh Coalition said that they've argued on many occasions that dangerous narratives purposely conflate all Sikhs with Khalistanis and all Khalistanis with violent extremism. And here's the example of how it works. Courtesy of disinformation, Indian media and a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, which is a major US think tank. On the 19th September, the Sikh Coalition was among 3 organisations invited to a meeting with the Biden administration to discuss the threat of transnational repression against US-based Sikhs. And of course, Reuters made a report based on that meeting, and we ourselves did a report on that very Reuters article that they produced. As a result of that, several Indian media outlets and it included NDTV, The Week Live, Deccan Herald and Op India, lifted the basic details out of that article, but they added their own headlines, claiming that the attendees were pro-Khalistan, anti-India and more. And here's a few examples of those headlines that they extracted and they themselves imposed upon this story. US officials met Sikh groups before President Biden hosted PM Modi. Here's how these organisations are Khalistani sympathisers. Another one. Before Biden-Modi talks, the US officials met anti-India, pro-Khalistani American Sikhs. Why the White House officials met pro-Khalistan activists ahead of Modi's US visit. In a first, White House engages with pro-Khalistan groups, gives assurance. And even NDTV, another Godi media outlet, even added an AI-generated image of a crowd of Sikh men ominously staring down the White House. And just to give you an idea, the Sikh organisations in attendance included a total of 5 people. There were only 5 Sikhs in attendance in those meetings. Yet here is this image that was spread around mainstream Indian media, implying that this army of Sikh Khalistan militants bombarded the White House and bombarded the US government. In other words, what a load of absolute nonsense. And the Sikh coalition continues that if the narrative was confined to outlets of dubious integrity, it'd be one thing. But more mainstream sources, of course, then picked up these sensationalist claims. Michael Rubin, a senior fellow with the American Enterprise Institute, apparently used them in an op-ed piece for First Post. And he wrote that President Joe Biden recently welcomed Sikh militants at the White House. There are no sources linked in his op-ed, but it appears that he is referencing these same false reports. And the headline of that op-ed reads, India should designate Canada as a state sponsor of terror. And it even says in the article, just pick out even just a small bit of this article, it says India is withdrawing its High Commissioner from Canada. No, it's not. He was actually kicked out because of what they were up to. And Mr. Rubin, the Sikh Coalition, says that Mr. Rubin, of course, again, Sikh Coalition being the respectable outlet that it is, says he has the right to express his opinions about Sikhs, Khalistanis and US-Canadian Indian relations. But to misrepresent civil rights advocates as militants is wrong. It's not just wrong, it's dangerous, as many organisations from marginalised communities would doubtlessly agree. And the Sikh Coalition did actually reach out to Mr. Rubin to request he corrects the record, but unsurprisingly they had no response. They also included a few of his colleagues from the AEI, that's the same institute, the think tank as well, but because we expect a major Washington think tank wouldn't want to be involved in sharing disinformation, etc., etc. One does wonder who sponsors this think tank. Clearly, we've talked about think tanks. We've talked a lot about the Hindu American Foundation, another supposed sort of foundational think tank that influences policy, but ultimately is another mouthpiece of the RSS. It would appear that the American Enterprise Institute really has an agenda at play once again here, reporting nonsense, this pro-India, anti-Khalistan propaganda. And so the Sikh Coalition signs off by saying, this example shows how baseless claims can seek to paint the whole Sikh community with a broad brush, and how those claims can leak into more mainstream discourse. Regardless, we will continue to push for accountability and fight against transnational repression. So the Sikh Coalition is saying very clearly, look, we are not anti-India. We are a fair organisation that represents the issues and rights of the Sikh community. And we expect any mainstream media outlet or any think tank or anybody with a public mouthpiece should respect information and send out the truth, not just regurgitate Hindutva, misinformation and propaganda. So once again, it just highlights, James, just how the Hindutva IT cells and of course Indian intelligence are behind this as well. Yeah. They're pushing out these nonsense stories, manipulating the narrative and twisting it to suit their own pro-Modi, pro-RSS narrative and trying to paint all Sikhs as Khalistani militants.
It's just going on and on. Excuse me, Angus. Sorry about that. It goes on, and we're
keeping
seeing
you
it
up.
in Canada, we're seeing it in the US, we're seeing it everywhere. And yet, at the end of the day, these think tanks that are very pro India, in terms of the Indian government, we're seeing more of that as well. And I think people are starting to realize the depths at which the foreign interference is really impacting media through social media and traditional.
Indeed. I mean, I always raise an eye of suspicion at any think tank. It's very obvious. Most think tanks are politically partisan. They always have an agenda. There is no such thing as an impartial think tank because they're all funded by somebody, and whoever funds something expects their agenda to be pushed. So, yeah, unfortunately,
That's right.
one must always treat think tanks with a deep degree of suspicion. So, my final story, I have to whip through this as we're running out of time. Pakistan. This nemesis, as I said in my introduction, this nemesis of the Indian right wing, this nemesis of Hindutva. Pakistan, this primarily Islamic nation. Well, interestingly, of course, part of the Punjab after partition fell into Pakistan. And we reported last week about the Kartarpur corridor, where India has been particularly difficult in making life for the Sikh pilgrims who are trying to visit the final resting place of the first Guru. And Pakistan, on the other hand, they have announced that they will grant on arrival free visas to Sikhs coming from North America and the UK. Basically, any pilgrims coming from outside Pakistan, Sikh pilgrims, they will be given free visas so that they can pay obeisance at historic gurdwaras across Pakistan. The announcement was made by Federal Interior Minister Mohsin Naqvi, and he said that within 30 minutes of arrival, these pilgrims will receive their visas. He said, "You're welcome to visit Pakistan up to 10 times a year. Each time we will welcome you here. Applicants only need to fill out a form and you will get a visa within 30 minutes. He expressed willingness to open other Sikh sites in Pakistan and said that no permit would be required to visit them. Our government wishes that more and more pilgrims, including young Sikhs, should visit Pakistan." And they expressed, US Sikhs expressed their appreciation for this, stating that it's made travel much easier. They said they were also interested in exploring investment opportunities in Pakistan. It's a two-way street, you see, Mr. Modi, is that when you don't oppress Sikhs, they're more interested in investing. And here Pakistan are realising, yeah, let's welcome in Sikh pilgrims. And as a result, Sikhs across the diaspora are saying, thank you very much for respecting our religion. As a result, we are now interested in potentially investing in your region. And welcoming the Sikh delegation, Naqvi, the foreign minister, emphasised the ease of travel for US citizens through a visa on arrival system. And the Pakistan Sikh Gurdwara Parmandat Committee president said it will encourage visits to holy sites, including Gurdwara Sri Darbar Sahib Kartarpur. That's the resting place of Guru Nanak Ji, the first Guru. The plan aims to host up to 1 million Sikh pilgrims annually, showing a strong support for the community. You think of the commercial benefits of that from a simple perspective. Absolutely. This is a lot of foresight. Well done to the Pakistan government for doing this. And it's noteworthy that Sikhs living in India-administered states, including the Punjab, have been demanding the condition of carrying a passport for the pilgrimage to Kartarpur Sahib. That's what we reported on last week. And of course, this demand is not being met by the Indian government. Without paying heed toward this demand, bilateral agreements between India and Pakistan were renewed, and the agreement was signed without any consultation with the Sikh community in Indian-administered Punjab. So I think, James, that highlights the difference between India and Pakistan. How ironic that Islamic Pakistan is actually a lot more amenable to Indian Sikhs or the Indian Sikh community and the just Sikh community globally than India is of its own Sikh community. I think that speaks volumes.
Absolutely. I just think it's a great way to honor, respect, and welcome the Sikh community into these important sites and monuments. But it brings revenue, it brings visits, it brings a lot of benefit to Pakistan as well, and they acknowledge that. So congratulations. That's a big announcement.
Indeed. Well done to Pakistan for that. And I think all we can say is it's another reason why India is shooting itself in the foot by alienating and ostracising the Punjab, because the Khalistan will happen. Money, international money, is going to pour into Khalistan. It is going to become an extremely successful, democratically run, sovereign nation. There will be a lot of money pouring into that nation. That is your loss, Narendra Modi. That is India's loss, but it's your own fault. I have no sympathy, unfortunately, for you. Right, on that note, James, let us move on to our final section, that of our comments, and lots of wonderful comments from our wonderful audience. Thank you to each and every one of you who have commented. Loads of really interesting comments. Unfortunately, due to time, we can't cover as many as we would like to. But here is a selection of some of your great comments. Now, last week's show that we entitled Just Embarrassing, yes, Narendra Modi has made it a bit of an embarrassment of himself. Kuljit Mangjat has said, India is doing this all the time when they get into power. Thank you to Western countries, they've finally started recognising it. Yeah, well, actually, I think Western countries have been a bit slow to recognising what's been going on in India. India, of course, have been doing their level best to ensure that the West doesn't know what it's been up to, the oppression it's been doing, not just in the Punjab, but of course in Kashmir and of course all the other regions, Manipur, another region across the other side of India. And but yes, I think well done, as I keep saying, to the Khalistan community. Well, of course, the Sikh community. Well done to you guys, because you have really been responsible through this grassroots movement that's pushed up through the political hierarchy. That the Sikh voice is being heard by the political mainstream. That is having an effect, which likewise is affecting mainstream news. Mainstream media are picking up on these issues. This is why the West is waking up to what India has been up to, James. I think we report regularly how the mainstream are picking up on all these stories now.
Absolutely. And there are certain nations where it was willful ignorance to not acknowledge what India was up to. So with all of this pressure and publicity and really them being caught with their hand in the cookie jar, it has really exposed it. So good on everybody that just keeps fighting for human rights. At the end of the day, it comes down to human rights.
Absolutely. RKS, James, this was your story about the addiction and that interesting article you did on addiction. RKS says, thanks for sharing that. I personally thought someone with strong willpower can overcome any type of addiction. I was wrong. I mean, I have to say, yeah, I'm from that same camp. I thought it was just an issue of willpower. Clearly, there's a lot more to it than willpower. There are physiological issues there, James. I think it was a fascinating article, that one.
Yeah, and that's why it is an effective weapon of certain groups or governments, because it's not just about willpower. It's about the brain chemistry and biochemics. So, yeah, thank you for your comments. I'm glad that you were able to get something out of it.
Yeah, Ashley Kandar wades in on the same subject. Ashley always likes to come in with a bit of a counter-narrative. And Ashley says, are Nihangs forced to consume drugs? Also, are you saying that Sikhs are forced to drink alcohol? Yes, there is a big problem in Punjab, without a doubt. I think the implication of Ashley's comment there is that there are a lot of Sikhs, and particularly Nihangs, who are taking drugs and drinking alcohol. Absolutely, this is the problem. I think this is highlighting the very problem, is that ultimately you can't blame them for doing this. They have been seduced by the evils of drugs, because there are a lot of very decent people. I've known some very respectable, decent people who have fallen victim to drugs. Again, lack of whatever it is, but they have ended up, their lives being ruined by drugs. You cannot point the finger of blame at these people. They were seduced by something that is deeply dangerous. And as James's article pointed out, again, it's not just willpower. It is a weapon that has been turned on these people, and they have become victims of this weapon. The only way to fight back against this is to stop these wretched things infiltrating the societies, particularly in the Punjab. So actually, yeah, you're right in many ways, but ironically, not in the way I think you intended your comments. So Mukhtar Singh says the BJP government.
For some people who have the history of living through the genocide and such, there are some people that drink to try to put that out of their mind and not to feel the emotions that they experience on a day in, day out. So there are a lot of other reasons that bring into the whole equation. So yeah, there's a lot more that we can't cover due to time, but yeah, keep that in mind that there are other outside influences.
Indeed. Mukhtar Singh comes in, same issue, but a very interesting different angle on this one. The BJP government is oiled by drug money. Thousands of tons of drugs pass through ports in Gujarat belonging to Modi's cronies. This year itself, 6,000 were caught, but none were charged. So this is a big allegation. This is saying that the BJP government is actually propped up by drug money. Well, we can't make those same allegations. We can only highlight somebody who's made those allegations. But, well, who knows? There have been all sorts of conspiracy theories saying the CIA is propped up by drug money in South America. Lots of conspiracy theories there, James. Who knows the truth? But, well, that's an interesting angle.
Absolutely, and I won't get into it because I'll just get ranting on the CIA's involvement in the crack pandemic and epidemic, so we'll move on.
There's a rabbit hole we don't want to go down. We don't want to be taken off air by the CIA, James. I think we've made enough enemies. Let's not make CIA one of them. Right. Oh, here we go. Talking about enemies. Here's some great comments. Franzuel says, wow, this channel is so full of propaganda and hate. Well, I'm actually deeply offended by this comment. I'll tell you why. We're not full of hate. I think far from it. I'm really offended by this. And in fact, I'm insulted by this. We don't pour hate. We just highlight the truth. I certainly, and James and I certainly don't hate India. We love India. I've said this enough occasions. I love India. I love everything about India. What I don't like is the RSS and Hindutva and what they've done to India. And but I don't think, James, we could say that we've delved into hatred, have we?
No, but I could see where people are just catching snippets and forming an opinion that way, where they're not watching all episodes, not watching all shows all the way through. So they may, in fairness, they may have just caught a certain story or something and took it in the wrong perspective or the wrong context. So, but hey, we love you for sending your message out there and sharing your concerns.
Indeed, yeah, I know, Franzuel, thank you for that comment. And as I say, I'm only insulted because you say we're pouring hatred. We're not. It's not hatred. We're debating and highlighting what we believe is the truth. Propaganda, yeah, absolutely, we're full of propaganda. We are full of pro-Khalistan propaganda as a counter-narrative to the propaganda, as Gurpreet points out, the Godi media's propaganda, NDTV, ANI, and all these other outlets that pour nonsense out to the Indian population. We are providing the counter-narrative that we believe is the truth. You don't have to believe us, but we are giving what we believe is the truth. And it's and Franzuel comes back and says, Khalistan ideology is full of hatred and propaganda. It is not. It is not full of hate. Well, I suppose you could argue that the Khalistan movement is full of hatred only because of what they have been subjected to. Not me personally, but there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Sikhs who have personally been impacted by murder, genocide, back in 1984, the oppression of the 1980s and 1990s. They have every right to feel hatred towards the Indian government. That is totally justified. And clearly you don't understand why that hatred exists. So unfortunately, I have to take you to task on this. You need to understand why there is hatred in the Khalistan community, because of what has happened to them. Once you understand that, then you will understand why they're actually totally justified, and it is fair for them to stand up and call out the Indian government for what has been done to their community. So, but thank you nonetheless for your comment. And James, this is a great one. Shiva M. Roy says, welcome back to the Idiot's Western Hypocrisy Show. Now, I will pick you up on this point because thank you for your comment. It did make me laugh. And thank you for welcoming us back, and thank you for your comment. It's great to have these bits of banter. But what I would say, you're absolutely right. The Hypocrisy Show. Absolutely, the West is deeply guilty of hypocrisy, And we point it out every time we see it. Whenever we talk about, for example, the US responsible for extrajudicial killings, we will shout from the rooftops how hypocritically wrong that is. We will never support extrajudicial killings of any in any context. We profoundly disagree with it. The West is guilty of all sorts of hypocrisy. The British establishment is guilty of dreadful hypocrisy. Likewise, we will call out that hypocrisy whenever we see it. So unfortunately, if James and I are hypocritical, please let us know. We will accept that criticism. But unfortunately, we can't accept that this is the way, unless you describe us as pointing out the hypocrisy globally. Then, yes, we are the Western Hypocrisy Show. But James, I don't know if you've got any comments on that one.
Hey, just share the news with all your friends to tune into the Hypocrisy Show. We'll get our viewers up and get our message out, so that's just fine.
Well, the point is, you watched it and you clearly were entertained by it. So thank you for watching us. Thank you for joining our audience. Tell your friends about us and let's increase the audience. And we do love comments like this, so do keep them coming. Thank you for that. Freddie Mercury also says, thank you for the unbiased reporting and not sugarcoating it. Well, we try not to. The free media is often too scared to call these things out for fear of offending. Well, this is the difference. And actually, you're right. Is that we, fortunately, and this is the wonder of the internet, the wonder of YouTube to some degree, it is censored obviously to some degree, but this is the wonder of the internet, is that it is possible for unbiased, for alternative narratives to be broadcast. We are not controlled like the mainstream media, like the BBC, for example, who has its own agenda controlled by the British establishment. Not like the Godi media, who are controlled obviously by the Indian establishment. It is the wonderful thing about the internet is that channels like us can exist. We can talk about literally almost whatever we want to talk about, as long as it is not illegal. We can talk about any narrative that we want. You do not have to believe it, but this is the point of freedom of speech. This is the point of free speech, is that we can talk about alternative narratives. We don't have to parrot the mainstream media narrative, do we, James?
Absolutely, and that's why the show is called Perspectives, because it is our perspective that we are sharing with you. Whether you agree with it or not, you may have a totally different perspective, and we can respect and appreciate that as well.
Absolutely. And Freddie's final comment, there's more in there I'd like to talk about. We don't have time, unfortunately. What do you personally think the chances are of Canada bringing Amit Shah to face justice? Is it realistic? My perspective, not in the slightest. It's more about symbolism than actual practicalities or realities. James, your thoughts?
I completely agree, but if they also have that international warrant of arrest out, it will also restrict his travel abilities to other nations as well. So it's all about making what impact we can to lessen the comfort of his life.
Indeed, I think you bang on. I think it's very, very unlikely Amit Shah will ever appear in a court of law in North America or anywhere else. I think this is more about highlighting the fact that he's been implicated, and it gives the diplomatic leverage of Western governments against India, saying now you are now beholden to us. We've caught you red-handed. If you don't do as we say or what we want, then face the consequences. B33263 says, I'm sorry. Oh yeah, these are the comments about Gurdas Man. Now we had one of our commenters actually stood up for Gurdas Man and said that Gurdas Man actually I think was a relative, or at least connected to this person's family, and said, look, he's actually deeply misunderstood. He's trying to represent the Sikh community in the way that he believed was the right way. Unsurprisingly, B33 and Gurpreet have both waded in saying, sorry, but we respect your opinion, but we don't agree with that. He's running a Dira, an institution that's nothing like Sikhi, and he disrespected our guru. He was a friend of a person, of course. He was a friend of the Butcher of Gujarat. That's Modi, Freudian slip. He was a friend of the Butcher of the Punjab. And Gurpreet likewise says, yes, he was a friend of the Butcher of Punjab, KPS Gill, etc., etc. And so, unsurprisingly, James, I think a lot of people have waded in our comments saying, with all due respect, no, Gurdas Man is not a good guy. He's not a friend of the Sikh community.
Absolutely. And, they've been very clear as to the reasons why as well. So, I respect that. But I do appreciate the person reaching out to give us that perspective as well.
Yeah, so thank you to all involved in that discussion, and particularly thank you to the person who was a relative of Kurdish man. Absolutely, we were more than happy to highlight your perspective. As we say, we are all about perspectives here. That's why we encourage all our commenters to give your perspective, even if it doesn't meet the mainstream perspective. We always like to highlight other narratives. We are, of course, big believers in freedom of speeches and respecting other people's views on all these topics. Young Baba James, this is what the person you're referring to. This is our audience member in Edmonton, Canada.
Yeah, and again, it's getting to be winter in Edmonton, so there's not much for people to do there. So hopefully, more of them tune in to watch us.
I think it does get rather cold over there, doesn't it, in winter?
It does, but it's a beautiful city.
Absolutely. And our final comment comes from one of our regular commenters who only ever leaves us a very short comment on the odd occasion, but I thought it was worth just a little hi, and a hi back to Manjit Kaur. Thank you for your little note of hi, and likewise I'd like to reciprocate that little note of hi to all our audience members, wherever you may be, whether it's in Delhi or the Punjab, whether it's in Australia, whether it is in North America or across in Europe or here in the UK, or wherever you may be. Do let us know where you are watching us from, and a big hi from all of us in the team here to all of you, and we appreciate your support. Unfortunately though, that is a good point on which to wrap up the show for the day. But please don't forget to keep your comments coming in. It really helps us keep going. We've had lots of lovely and very supportive comments, and loads of really educational ones. As I say, quite a few critical ones. We do especially like to highlight and debate and have a bit of banter with our critics. So don't be afraid of sending in a few naughty and rude comments. We do like those too. Don't forget, of course, you can email us directly at message@satloadstv.com if there's anything you'd like to let us know about that you don't want to put in the public domain. But in the meantime, you have been watching Perspectives, and it is a goodbye from me. It is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone. Thanks for watching.
Indeed, thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.